All right, hey everyone. Today welcome to Intro to Marxism Part 5. This is a follow-up on the prior 4 videos. Some of them were PowerPoints, but exploring some of the basics of Marxism, comparing Marx to Locke was the last video, etc. Today I want to discuss and actually read to you the Friedrich Engels speech at the grave of Karl Marx. This is a really important piece because it's at his death, at his funeral, and it's noting what, or his best friend and comrade, fellow Marxist, noting 2 laws that Marx discovered. I'm just going to read through the speech. It's a very short speech and comment on it very briefly. You can access this at Marxist.org. Just look under Engels speeches and for the speech at the grave of Karl Marx. This is March 17, 1883. I briefly mentioned it and the 2 laws in part 2 of Intro to Marxism. On the 14th of March, at 2:45 in the afternoon, the greatest living thinker ceased to think. He had been left alone for scarcely 2 minutes, and when we came back, we found him in his armchair, peacefully gone to sleep, but forever. So this is Marx. This is Engels saying Marx is the greatest living thinker ever. This is the Marx is the greatest living thinker, ceasing to think. Some curious Descartes terminology there. An immeasurable loss has been sustained by both the militant proletariat of Europe and America, and by historical science in the death of this man. So not only militant proletariat, but so communists and the proletariat, but also historical science too. The gap that has been left by the departure of this mighty spirit will soon enough make itself felt. Now, for my students, forgive me, this is actually in your packet. You can follow along. It's right before the Communist Manifesto. Just as Darwin discovered the law of development or of organic nature, so Marx discovered the law of development of human history. So he has discovered a law just like Einstein, Newton, and just like, quote, Darwin. So he is, if you will, he's a scientist here. The simple fact, hitherto concealed by an overgrowth of ideology, that mankind must first of all eat, drink, and have shelter and clothing before it can pursue politics, science, art, religion, etc. So materialism is fundamental to human history. That therefore the production of the immediate material means, and consequently the degree of economic development attained by a given people or during a given epoch, form the foundation upon which the state institutions, the legal conceptions, art, and even ideas on religion of the people concerned have been evolved, and in the light of which they must therefore be explained instead of vice versa, as had hitherto been the case. So previously we thought all these other institutions and religion and whatnot all came from, were fundamental, and then we had other things rising out of it. Not so. In other words, flipping Hegel on his head for him, flipping him on his head and saying this is the law of development of human history. It's the materials conception. But that is not all. That's not the only law he discovered. Marx also discovered the second law, the special law of motion governing the present day capitalist mode of production and the bourgeois society that this mode of production has created. The discovery of surplus value suddenly threw light on the problem. in trying to solve which all previous investigations of bourgeois economists and social critics had been groping in the dark. 2 such discoveries would have been enough for a lifetime, right? Two universal laws discovered. 2 would be enough for a lifetime. Happy the man to whom it is granted to make even one such discovery. But in every single field which Marx investigated, and he investigated very many fields, none of them superficially, in every field, even in that of mathematics, he made independent discoveries. So really Marx is a mathematician as well. Such was the man of science. But this was not even half the man. Science was for Marx a historically dynamic, revolutionary force. However great the joy with which he welcomed a new discovery in some theoretical science whose practical application, perhaps it was as yet quite impossible to envisage, he experienced quite another kind of joy when the discovery involved immediate revolutionary changes in industry and in historical development in general. For example, he followed closely the development of the discoveries made in the field of electricity and recently those of Marcel Duprez. For Marx was, before all else, a revolutionist. So this is truly, he was a scientist, sure, but he was a revolutionist. His real mission in life was to contribute in one way or another to the overthrow of capitalist society and of the state institutions which it brought into being, to contribute to the liberation of the modern proletariat, which he was the first to make conscious of its own position and its need, conscious of the conditions of its emancipation. So he's the first to bring all this to light. Fighting was his element. Fighting, real violent, right? Fighting, that's the intent here. And he fought with a passion, a tenacity, and a success such as few could rival. His work was, I'm just listing out the various works, they're listed in German, so I won't even try to pronounce them. And in addition to these, a host of militant pamphlets working in organizations in Paris, Brussels, and London. And finally, crowning all, the formation of the great International Working Man's Association. This was indeed an achievement of which its founder might well have been proud even if he had done nothing else. And consequently, Marx was the best hated and most calumniated man of his time. Governments, both absolutist and republican, deported him from their territories. Bourgeois, whether conservative or ultra-democratic, vied with one another in heaping slanders upon him. All this he brushed aside as though it were a cobweb, ignoring it, answering only when extreme necessity compelled him. And he died, beloved, revered, mourned by millions of revolutionary fellow workers, from the mines of Siberia to California, in all parts of Europe and America. And I make bold to say, though he may have had many opponents, he had hardly one personal enemy. His name will endure through the ages, and so also will his work. There's Marx, my friends.